Hey, let's continue our conversation of the great conversation. I'm going to share with you three stories today um, that I think just generally make you a better, well read person who can appreciate deeper cultural and literary references. So, while I would recommend you read these stories, uh, I also think that it's your responsibility as a person in this culture to just have a general knowledge about them. So, the truth is, I've never actually read Don Quixote either, but I am at least familiar enough with it to understand when I hear references to it, when I hear it in movies and TV shows and other books, to at least know what's going on. So, I have a familiarity with what that story is. So, Oedipus is a Greek tragedy. Don Quixote is a story of adventure, and Cyrano de Bergerac is kind of a love story tragedy. Um, Cyrano is one of my favorites. I love Cyrano. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll go through these stories real quickly. Again, I recommend that at some point in your life you read these books, but if not, um, at least you'll have a familiar understanding of who these characters are and what these stories are because I think it will help you in life. So, Greeks, we're going way, way back to the ancient Greeks. Greeks loved tragedies. They built the amphitheaters and they would have plays and performances. So, in the particular play we are going to talk about, someone murders the king, someone marries his own mother, and then someone pulls out his own eyes. If that sounds wild and crazy, that's because it is. And it's an incredible story. Uh, it's the story of Oedipus Rex. Now, technically, these are the Sophocles plays. They are three of them, and they all go together. It starts with Antigone, and then Oedipus Rex, and Oedipus at Colonus. But we're speaking specifically about Oedipus Rex because that's kind of the most popular one. Um, so, anyway, so who wrote it? This guy named Sophocles. When was it written? 429 BC. And what is the story? As I mentioned, it's three Greek tragedies. Very briefly, Oedipus is abandoned as a child. Oedipus grows up to be a young man and he kills the king. He doesn't know it, but that king was his biological father. He marries the queen, who's now a widow because he killed her husband. And what he doesn't know is that she's actually his biological mother. His mother and wife hangs herself, and then Oedipus gouges out his own eyes. So, very quickly, here's how the play starts. A plague has stricken Thebes. So, we're going to start here in Thebes. Uh, and the citizens gather outside the palace of their king Oedipus, asking him to take action. Oedipus contacts the oracle at Delphi because the oracle would have been this person who could see into the future, like a prophet, kind of a godlike figure. So, to learn how to help the city, and learns that the plague will end when the murderer of the former king of Thebes is caught and expelled from the city. But the murderer is living in the city, is what this oracle says. So Oedipus promises to solve this mystery, to find the murderer, and kick the murderer out. So Oedipus sends for a blind prophet, Tiresias, and asks him what he knows about the murder. And Tiresias responds rather mysteriously, saying that he can't see the truth when the truth brings nothing but pain, which is ironic because he's blind. And so, this idea of blindness and yet seeing is a big part of it. So, Tiresias refuses to tell Oedipus what he knows. So, Oedipus gets angry and kind of curses the old man. And then Tiresias reveals that Oedipus himself is this murderer. Well, Oedipus doesn't believe it. Um, and so there's kind of this disagreement. Tiresias defends his skills as a prophet, noting that Oedipus's parents found him, Tiresias, to be trustworthy. So, at the mention of Oedipus's parents, who grew up in the distant Corinth, he wants to know how Tiresias knew his parents, but Tiresias doesn't really explain everything. Okay, so um, Tiresias leaves one last riddle for Oedipus before he leaves, saying that the murderer will turn out to be both father and brother to his own children, and will be the son of his own wife. And so this is clearly an incestuous problem. One of the things Greeks had no problem with getting it on, but they did not appreciate incest. So this was a pretty serious problem. All right. So Oedipus's wife, Jocasta, who is also the widow of the dead king, the former dead king, she comes in and wants to know why these people are fighting. Oedipus explains to his wife that the prophet has said that Oedipus is the murderer. And Oedipus's wife says this interesting thing, says that all prophecies are false, which has this interesting thematic idea, especially for the Greeks, because they believed in prophets and lots of gods and goddesses and supernatural powers. And she says, all prophecies are false. Don't believe them at all. All right. As proof, she says that the Delphi oracle once told her that her and her former husband would be murdered by their own son, when in fact, they kicked their son out when he was just a baby. And the king was murdered by a group of thieves. But her description of the former king's murder sounds familiar to Oedipus. And Oedipus kind of explores this. Okay? What nobody quite puts together is that when Oedipus showed up in Thebes, there was the king and his group, and they were walking down the road, and Oedipus was walking down the road, and they said, you move, no, you move, no, you move, no, you move. And so Oedipus kills everybody. He doesn't know who they are. Oedipus just kills everybody. And so then Oedipus moves into Thebes. He finds this hot-looking woman who is now a widow because her husband just got killed, and he marries her. But what he doesn't know is that he had killed his father and that he just married his mother. Because these two were told by a prophet that their son would kill the father and marry the mother. And so what they did is they took their brand new baby boy and they put him on a hill far away. That was kind of a form of abortion, sort of. The infant would have just been left to the weather and the animals and would have eventually died. And that's essentially what they did. They left him out. They couldn't kill him, but they left him to die. What they don't know is that a farmer picked up this baby and started taking care of this baby and raised him up. And so as this story starts to draw out, Oedipus realizes he is an adopted son over here. He's the biological son over here. And this one thing that everybody was trying to avoid, this one prophecy, actually is the truth and comes true. So this is horrible. Oedipus is so horrified at what he's done. He gouges his own eyeballs out, and his wife / mother hangs and kills herself, and thus ends the play in absolute and complete tragedy. Death upon death upon death. And the Greeks loved it, and we loved it, and it's a fun, wild story. So real quick, Oedipus starts in Thebes, although he doesn't know it. He moves to Corinth, where he grows up. He comes back to Thebes, where he kills the king and marries the queen, where he then finds out that the king and queen were his parents. So that's all kinds of interesting. So some of the major themes here. Number one, willingness to ignore the truth. Oedipus looks at obvious details of everyday life and pretends to not see them. And of course, you have this idea of the blind prophet being able to see the truth. So this idea, sometimes we cut ourselves off to the truth because we're embarrassed or ashamed or whatever. Okay. And then, of course, it's this idea of limits of free will, because both the king and the queen tried to avoid their fate. They tried to change their fate. And yet, by changing it, it's actually what caused it to happen. Had they kept the baby in their family, things might not have ended this way. Oedipus tries to change his fate with his decisions and actions, but he can't avoid it, he can't escape it. So the question then is for you: how much are you in control of your life? Do you believe in a God? Do you believe in fate and destiny? The Greeks believed in gods and prophets. So what do you believe in? Do you have a choice? Is your life predetermined, or do you have free will and free exercise? All right, some other ideas here. Actually, that's pretty much the same slide. Sorry. All right. Some other ways that we see Oedipus even today. Number one, Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix, this idea of Harry being able to fight against his own fate, the prophecy of what he would do, and is he going to step into that fate or not? Star Wars, the famous line, your eyes can deceive you, don't trust them. This idea of blindness and yet seeing the truth, and having eyes and missing the obvious truth. Remember, Oedipus plucks his own eyes out at the end. He would rather be physically blind than be blind to the truth. And then probably the biggest one here is what we know as the Oedipal complex. Oedipal complex, which of course is the spin on Oedipus, the name. And Sigmund Freud says, to direct our first sexual impulse towards our mother, and our first hatred and our first murderous wish against our father. Now, I don't know what you think about this idea, but this is a true idea that people talk about and discuss and explore. I don't know if I've ever wanted to murder my father and sleep with my mother. I don't know if you have ever wanted to murder your father and sleep with your mother. But Sigmund Freud, the very famous psychologist, says that we all have those kinds of feelings where we want to supplant one gender of our parent and be with the other gender in a unique way. So save that for the psychology class. All this to say, you will hear people talk about the Oedipal complex. So anyway, it's a thing, which leads us to some funny little comics here. So we got these people on the left here going into the tunnel of love, and the ticket guy says, one adult and one child. Coming right up, Master Oedipus. Get it? Oedipus going with his mom in the tunnel of love. It's gross, but it's funny. And then over here, Frank and Ernest. Why do we always have to eat here, Oedipus? And it's Mom's Diner. He likes to go to Mom's Diner. That's a joke. All right, moving right along. Don Quixote, notice how I pronounce that, Quixote, also sometimes known as the Man of La Mancha, because that's where he's from. So, who wrote it? Miguel de Cervantes, and it was published in 1606. All right, so let's see if I can go over this one really quickly. The story follows the adventure of a middle-aged man from La Mancha, whose name is Don Quixote. Don Quixote was obsessed with this idea of chivalry because he had read lots of books of chivalrous acts. He decides to take up his lance and sword and defend the helpless and destroy the wicked. After his first adventure failed, he sets out on a second, and he gets this kind of simple-minded helper named Sancho Panza, who will accompany him and kind of be his faithful squire. All right. Don Quixote rides his horse Rocinante. So pay attention to that name because that one's probably one of the common connections we'll make as well. All right. And basically it's this. Don Quixote literally gets his mind so confused about what is real and what is fictional that he goes up to people thinking he's saving them, and what he does is causes more trouble. And he goes up to people who cause trouble, and he actually kind of rewards them and gives them these good things because he thinks he's being this brave, chivalric knight. Okay, he becomes more of a bandit than a savior. He steals and hurts people. He abandons a boy in the hands of an evil farmer. He steals. He drinks a magic elixir that actually makes him almost deathly ill. But when he gets better, he goes, see, it made me better. His understanding is warped. He thinks this peasant woman, this little, poor, insignificant woman, is a princess, and he keeps trying to woo her. All right. Um, Sancho goes along with him on a lot of these adventures, and kind of as the straight man, he seems to see reality for what it is, but he continues to help his master. Um, all right. Some of Don Quixote's friends try and help him, and they go into his library and they burn all of his books, or they try to burn all of his books, because the books are what have warped and twisted Don Quixote's mind. So, in the end, Don Quixote comes back home a beaten and battered old man, and he swears off chivalry, and eventually he just dies. So, why does this story Don Quixote matter? Well, number one, it has to do with this idea of going on great adventures. And we love great adventures. Um, it has to do with this idea of chivalry. So let's not get confused here with this idea of romance. It's not that kind of romance and chivalry. We're not talking about romantic relations. We're talking about this idea of a knight protector, someone who slays dragons, protects the weak, um, is a bulwark or a defender against the strong, and bullies against people who are evil with their intentions. So Don Quixote wants to be this chivalrous knight, but what you find out in the story is that he fails and he fails and he fails again. So one of the things that the story draws our attention to is this idea of what is honor, what is nobility, what does it mean to be a good person and to serve with honor. So some of the things that make a chivalric knight: noble warrior, thoughtful leader, religious Christian, gentleman to all the ladies, and serves his master with honor. But Don Quixote has a difficult time fulfilling all those requirements. Um, Here's a couple of the things that come up here. He calls prostitutes ladies. He gets them confused. He thinks a wizard is destroying his books. And one of the famous things we get here is this idea of tilting at windmills, which we'll talk about in just a moment. All right. So let's see here. Why is it important? Don Quixote tried to be a flesh and blood example of this knight in an attempt to force his contemporaries to face their own failure and to maintain the old system of morality. The conflict between the old and the new reaches an impasse here. No one understands Don Quixote, and he does not understand anyone else. So, one of the ideas you get here is this idea of the world changing, and this idea of what is the view of morality. As the world changes, do our views of morality change and adapt and grow? Which I think is particularly interesting in our day and age. One of the other things here is this idea of class and worth. Don Quixote was an upper class nobility, and he falls in love with this peasant woman, right? Distinguishing between a person's class and a person's worth was a fairly radical idea, meaning if you were a noble person, you were worth being a good person. And if you were a peasant person, you were worthless. But this story actually tries to explore what is a person worth? What is the value of an actual human? Not in terms of money, but just in terms of ideas and how we value them. Okay? Despite his low status, the peasant Sancho is wise and thoughtful and helps out his master and is loyal. Likewise, other shepherds throughout the story appear quite wise. And in contrast, we have some of the other characters who, although they are nobility, they are cruel and foolish and unkind. And so Cervantes, the author here, emphasizes these differences between class and worth by using Don Quixote. So, other ways that we see this today. If you've watched, what is it on Amazon? The Expanse. The Expanse, the spaceship is called Rocinante, the old broken down horse, and yet they ride in Rocinante, the old broken down horse. Quixotic is a word that we get from Quixote, and we go on these quixotic adventures, often adventures that have no actual ending, that do not result in any kind of real purpose or resolution. So when we think of Don Quixote, he never actually accomplished any of his goals. He went on a quixotic adventure, and we still see that word used today all the time. And then lastly, the phrase tilting at windmills. One of the things that Quixote does is he charges at a windmill thinking it is a monstrous beast and he's going to destroy this monstrous beast. But he doesn't see reality for what it is. It's just a windmill. And so we use this phrase, oh, he is just tilting at windmills, or she is just tilting at windmills, meaning they're challenging something that doesn't need to be challenged. They're battling something that is unimportant and doesn't need to be battled. So quixotic and tilting at windmills and Rocinante, those are still some terms that we use today that come from this story. All right, moving right along. My favorite of the, with me it's vacuum cleaners. Get it? Because here's Don Quixote and he's going to charge the windmill, and the dog's like, no, I want to charge vacuum cleaners because he's a dog. It's funny. And you understand it because you now understand a little bit about the story. All right. Cyrano de Bergerac. One of my favorites here. I love Cyrano de Bergerac. There's been a couple of different versions of it. We'll talk about those in a minute. It was written by Edmond Rostand, who lived from 1868 to 1918. The story itself was written in 1897. So, again, pretty old story. So let's go through the basic plot very quickly. One of the things you notice is the large nose of Cyrano. And yes, that is actually on purpose. So, it is in Paris, the year 1640, and the brilliant poet and swordsman Cyrano de Bergerac finds himself in love with the beautiful Roxanne. Now, technically, it's his cousin, but long time ago and whatever, we won't get... This isn't the kind of incest like with Oedipus, but whatever. Anyway, he loves Roxanne. You'll notice I said he's a swordsman, and he truly was a master swordsman. He was an excellent fighter. He was brave and strong, and he was a true hero. Despite Cyrano's brilliance and charisma, he had a shockingly large nose that affects his appearance, and he considers himself too ugly to risk telling Roxanne his true feelings. So we are going to pause here for just a minute. Let's see if I can pause. Cool, I think that worked. All right, so let us continue. Where was I? Cyrano, he thinks he's too ugly to tell Roxanne his feelings. So one night, Cyrano goes to a playhouse, and he's going to kind of make some trouble. And so he kind of gets in a fight with some of the people and makes kind of a big show, and he kind of acts heroically. Now, at the play was also Roxanne, but also was a young man named Christian. And Christian says to his friend that he loves Roxanne. All right, so Cyrano actually goes onto the stage and he bullies this actor off the stage, and a group of aristocrats try to send Cyrano away. But he challenges them all to a duel. He fights, and as he fights, Cyrano improvises a poem about the duel. And then, speaking his last line, he thrusts his sword home and destroys his enemies. Now, his victory causes such a sensation. It was quite wildly entertaining that he wrote this wonderful poem while also fighting all these bad guys. Okay? Roxanne was impressed, so she sent him a message, and so Roxanne and Cyrano are going to meet. Now, what also happens is that Christian's friend is going to get ambushed, and Cyrano learns about this ambush, and Cyrano promises, I'm going to make sure this man gets home safe, even if I have to fight these 100 men myself. So, Cyrano, like I said, is a very brave and noble character. Cyrano meets with Roxanne, and he almost tells her he loves her, but he just can't do it. Instead, she confides in Cyrano that she loves Christian, this other man, Christian. Now, Christian joins Cyrano's kind of company of the guards, and so she asks Cyrano, please protect Christian, and he agrees. All right. Now, the big nose was a big deal. And if you insulted Cyrano's nose, you were pretty much guaranteed to be killed. So Christian tries to act all tough. He walks up to Cyrano and insults his nose. And rather than fighting, Cyrano is so distracted, because Roxanne loves Christian, that he actually just accepts it from Christian and doesn't give Christian a hard time. So Christian falls in love with Roxanne. So you got Roxanne and Christian who love each other, but they can't really say anything. Sorry, did I get that right? What did I say? Roxanne and Christian love each other, and Cyrano's kind of this third wheel in this love triangle. So Christian says, you know what, Cyrano? Now that we're friends, I'm not very smart. I'm not very good with the ladies. Could you help me? And Cyrano agrees to help Christian win Roxanne. So Cyrano is going to help this guy win the guy that Cyrano loves. All right, so let's try and get to the most important parts here. Cyrano writes these letters for Christian, and he recites these poems for Christian. One night, Christian goes out to Roxanne's window, and he's looking up, and Christian's saying, Roxanne, I love you, and you're pretty, and you're really a great person. And he sounds like an idiot. And Roxanne thinks, you used to write these beautiful letters. Why are you such a moron right now? Cyrano comes to the rescue, pushes Christian aside, stands in the shadows, hiding his face, and Cyrano recites this beautiful love poetry for Roxanne. And Roxanne thinks it's from Christian, and Roxanne loves Christian. Right? All right. So Roxanne and Christian are secretly married, and then Christian is sent off to battle. Christian and Cyrano are sent off to battle. And this battle happens, and Cyrano writes to Roxanne every single day, and he signs Christian's name. Then Roxanne shows up at the battlefield because she wants to see Christian, and she brings a feast to the soldiers. But Christian has guessed that Cyrano truly loves Roxanne, and he forces Cyrano to tell the truth and make her choose between Christian and Cyrano. Right as Cyrano is about to say what he believes, a gunshot happens and kills Christian. And so Cyrano cannot tell Roxanne the truth. She faints. Cyrano charges into battle. Christian is dead. 15 years later, Roxanne is living in a convent, and Cyrano visits her all the time. But then word comes that Cyrano is very sick and very ill. And someone tells Roxanne Cyrano is very sick and very ill. But what they don't know is Cyrano snuck out of his house, very sick and very ill, to go see Roxanne one last time. As night falls, Cyrano is reading to Roxanne one of Christian's letters, and then it gets completely dark, and yet Cyrano continues to read, and you can't read in the dark. And Roxanne realizes it's been Cyrano all along. Cyrano is the one I love. And then Cyrano dies. It's a tragedy, but it's also got some very funny stuff in it. And Cyrano is really just a wonderful character. All right. So you can see here's this picture of Steve Martin. Perhaps you've heard of him. He is a very famous comedian and actor. And he actually did a version of Cyrano. And the movie is called Roxanne. But they turned that one into kind of more of a comedy. It didn't have the sad, tragic ending. All right. So why does it matter? Values over virtue here. Cyrano placed strong emphasis on values and ideals. Cyrano is the play's eloquent an ardent defender of integrity, bravery, glory, and the pursuit of love and women. The play's main conflict is Cyrano's inability to tell Roxanne how much he loves her. And because he promised, he never breaks his word. Okay? Cyrano protects his secret nearly to his death, and his death itself, though tragic, is also transcendent. The play suggests that by adhering to his values at the expense of his own personal desires, Cyrano achieves an ideal, untarnished moral standing. So this idea that if you stand true to true values, that is the most important thing overall. Sometimes we should not give in to our own personal wants and desires, because if we made a promise, we should not break our promise. And of course, the inner beauty versus outer beauty. One of the things we learn about Cyrano is he truly is just a good guy, but his outer beauty is kind of one of ugliness. On the other side, you have Christian, who outwardly is very handsome, but inwardly he's kind of stupid. Okay, so there's some of that going on. So this idea of what should we look at, outward beauty or the inward beauty? All right, one of the reasons we look at this is it's probably the second most famous balcony scene in all of literature, and I point this out. So here we have Roxanne, here we have Christian hiding in the shadows, and here we have Cyrano proclaiming his love for her. And it's a very famous scene where Christian sounded like an idiot, and Roxanne was about ready to break up with him. And then Cyrano comes out and professes his beautiful love for her. But it's all for Christian's sake at this point. All right. And it's the second most famous balcony scene because when we get to Romeo and Juliet, they probably have what's considered the most famous balcony scene in all of literature. So that's Cyrano. I feel like I rushed through stuff. If you want, there's a very famous scene on YouTube, although it's got some bad language. So I'm not going to show that. But anyway, I think this one's so funny. Tyrannosaurus Rex. They got the nose. Tyrannosaurus, not Tyrannosaurus, but Cyrano. Get it? Tyrannosaurus, Cyrano, big nose. Anyway, Oedipus kills his father, marries his mother. Don Quixote goes on ridiculous adventures and proves nothing at all. And Cyrano de Bergerac has a big, ugly nose, but he is a smart and brave and honorable man, and he dies tragically. Actually, come to think of it, they all died rather tragically. All right, so those are stories that you should be aware of, stories that you should know, and my guess is that in the very near future, you will hear something, and you'll go, I know what that means now. You'll hear the word, you'll hear the comment, you'll hear the reference to it, the allusion to it. You're like, I get it now. All right, my recommendation, go read them. But if you never do read them, at least now you'll have some idea of what people are talking about. All right, that sums it up, everybody. All right, have a good day. Talk to you later.